Hey everyone, I'm Jo Holden. I'm an active conduit for source intelligence and I'm here to help the collective. So today's session, part of the Reality as a Simulation series, what will become a series, I am going to be talking about planes of existence in terms of what constitutes the different levels and layers of coding of the soul, soul being an aspect of source, intelligence, energy, that has a unique identifier, so it's an aspect that has been assigned to experience various incarnations, and for each incarnation it will have a unique identifier that pairs it. So the soul has its own unique identifier overall. Each incarnation has a pairing unique identifying code. That unique identifier gives it access to the planes of existence that we know as the mental, etherical, emotional, causal, astral, physical, optimal, supernal. We'll talk about them, and we'll also talk about the equal opposites that have emerged over time in terms of what you could say is anti-source programming, but really it's that I am not programming. It's what emerges over time as a result of us, and I say us as in any being with agency that incarnates into a construct, into a world, into a realm. During that experience where we may be faced with circumstances and conditions that we have a negative sort of response to or feel negative effects from, that can shift the energy. So the energy flow is supposed to be constantly input, output, that feeds back, and would come back through to non-physical, to source, but it can create a reversal of that, where instead of that power constantly feeding back, it takes power from, and we're going to talk about how that functions and why that functions and why that mechanism's there within the session. So the planes of existence being the levels and layers of the soul being an aspect of source. Each and every one of us is a representation of that. For us to exist, we have to have that initial, original source coding and the projection of the organic will. This is what we talked about in the last session, that is feeding, is driving that, and what we on the input side of things receive, decode, express, and then receive reaction, response, results to, we re-encode and feedback to God, Source, Creator, as the whole, as the Almighty, as the Most High. So the entire system, it runs, operates through soul expressions on different levels and layers, different densities of being. Every soul has access to all aspects, all densities, but dependent upon the incarnation that you're in, the form that you take, your capabilities and capacities can be different dependent upon, what not just the personal experiences, but what the levels of influence, let's say. So you've got you yourself, you've got familial influences, family you're born into, the wider circle being friends and colleagues and communities of interest that you spend time with or around. Then you've got community as in geographically, or depending on what your profession is or whatever, there can be a broader network, let's say, that you're connected into, and so it goes until we get to sort of the global collective level. And so each and every level and layer of that can and does have an impact, have an effect on your level of consciousness, and that directly connects to what densities of reality we typically tap into. Now, there are, of course, many people on the planet that are having experiences that are outside of the norm. That's part of the process that's playing out in terms of, frequencies that are emitting and transmitting and permeating the planet itself. That the Earth in and of herself has her own soul transmission. So I talked about this the other session that I did last year. Each and every body of any kind, whether you're talking about planetary bodies, celestial in terms of stars and sun, well, stars, suns are stars, but you know what I'm saying, moons, so on, they each and all have soul transmissions too, and then we are hosted, let's say, within their soul transmission. Ours connects at the supernal level, so we'll talk more about that, and when we look at the holographic model of it, that becomes all the more significant. So each plane of existence that we have filters different aspects of the experience that we have as being in the construct, in the simulation. So they're pretty self-explanatory in the sense of, I've given some descriptions here, but to use the supernal as an example, because we've just mentioned it. So when I talked about the coding, our souls, each and every soul that exists is a unique identifier, a unique aspect of source. So you have coding for that. You also would have coding for the specific incarnation of the soul. So this particular version of my soul expression has its own unique identifier to pair, and you would also have whatever construct the soul for that particular incarnation is connecting into another sort of pairing with that. So anything that we think, feel, any choices we make, anything we give charge to, every aspect of our experience is recorded, and it's recorded for each lifetime that we live, each incarnation that we have. So cumulatively we would know, universally or multiversely, this is the Akashic records, but it is subcategorized, subfolded, if you like, into for each specific soul and for each specific lifetime of each soul. So if ever there's an incentive to maybe clean up your thoughts a little bit, or make better choices, there you go. But that's a joke. I'm not in any way trying to preach to anyone. So at the supernal level, the code that we have is part of what makes our experience when, for instance, as human beings, when we talk about genetic coding, at the construct level, it has to be for viability of life within that particular construct. So, we need to be able to breathe the air, we need to be able to drink and bathe in water, we need to be able to find food sources that are compatible. So at the most elementary, fundamental level, this is the reason why when it comes to DNA, for instance, we can share so much of that with other species of beings. So 99% similar to chimps. I think it's something like 70% similar to a banana. It's that. So at that level of coding, that connection is about us having the coding to support our ability to not just survive but thrive in that particular construct. So that would be the supernal. That's what gives life. It gives viability of life. It enables us to be a energetic match to the particular world or realm that we're experiencing for that particular incarnation. At the optimal level, it would be more species specific, and we're talking about the physical vessel here because the first 3 planes are more specifically tailored to supporting us at that level in terms of us having a presence, a physical, avatar, vehicle, vessel, whatever, through which to interact with the reality in order to be able to see and smell and taste and touch things. They're the levels and layers of coding that are most significant for that side of things. So the optimal would be species specific, i.e. things that we can eat that dogs can't eat, or there's loads of obvious examples to that in terms of where it would be, the coding would be different, and I guess that would, I could be wrong here, but I think that would be more connected to RNA. So you've got DNA at the nuclear level, that would be, it's the original source coding that is for viability of life. Your RNA, as far as I'm aware, is the it's the reader, it's what takes from that coding and expresses from it, creates from it, which the RNA would then distinguish and determine, optimally speaking, for that particular species what expressions are going to be most life supportive. And then at the physical level, that's where your mitochondrial DNA, as in your energy generation, and at that level you're going to have more personally specific. You can, of course, at the physical sort of level, this of course still, what's the word I'm looking for? There's still an impact, there's still effects that are supported by these, because you to think of it all working and interacting together as well. Each of these planes, it's not like you can separate them out, and everything's a sum total effect. So there are examples I will give when we get into some of the stuff more about altered states of consciousness and accessing different planes of existence. There are ways that you can access the planes of existence on a singular sort of level, but you're still processing data on all aspects of your being, even though your point of focus is that particular plane of existence, if that makes sense. So in the physical, the third plane for us is what is informing much of what we interpret and decode, as in the matter-based stuff, the solids, liquids, gases, the stuff that the observable, objective reality around us is being presented to us through that plane of existence, but it's being informed by both the supernal and optimal coming through the construct where we're connected in. So if you've got your soul expression that is all 9 planes of existence, you're connected in at the supernal, but that connection, what's feeding to you, is coming through the construct as well, because it'll be easier when I show you the holographic sort of model that I have, but if you understand, I think of a good example. So if you were talking about manifestation, for instance, if there's something you're hoping for, praying for, wishing for, in order to experience it in the physical material reality, so you want it to show up here in the third plane, in order to support that, the construct itself also has to be in agreement, in alignment, in joinder with that, in order for it to present, if that makes sense. So any and all signals that our soul transmissions are feeding back to source, and then source, God, creator, the coding is created to bring that into being for us. That, you know, light generation is bringing the activation or the co-creation of that through the planes of existence for us, in order for it to make its way into the world, because that's where we're being hosted. It also, those signals also have to be shared with that being, with that entity too, right? So when I do the holographic thing, it'll make more sense. But so we have planes of our existence that we would class as non-physical. Astral, sort of, it's the place where the two meet, it's the place where the veils meet, because we do experience and interact with the astral, you know, obvious dreams, for instance. There are ways that, you know, you'll see a lot of people online. I talk about this in the sessions that I did last year. You'll see a lot of people online talking about astral projection, or you know, outer body experiences that are consciously motivated, consciously created, which any of those experiences that I've had, they haven't been. It's not that I've chose to do it, it's happened sort of to me. And obviously on a higher soul perspective, I must have, you know, agreed to it, wanted it, chosen it. But from my character self perspective, these things happened more spontaneously for me. So astral is the blueprint, as it says right there. So the upper astral is the organic blueprints. What would be often referred to as the lower astral would be where there's manipulated, what was once source coding has been corrupted, corroded, manipulated, and so there is blueprints for the existence of other things. So the astral being the point at which, where the coding that we are receiving, transmitting and feeding back, what it is that we're co-creating has to come through a process of the various planes of our existence, and this is true for any type of being. So if we're thinking about something, it doesn't become something until we decide to do something about it, right? So the mental processing is in and of itself a co-creative mechanism. It is a necessary aspect of our presence, our beingness, our what gives possibility and potential to us. But until we choose to take action, so the thoughts that we have, we're going to have some sort of feeling state in response to that. So that's sort of the body either getting ready or repelling from the thought of, you know, whatever it is that you're thinking. The body's also processing information, processing data, in conjunction with. So if your thoughts and feelings are aligned, the emotional state that you, let's keep it to the organic for now, so the emotional state that should be generated from that should be positive. It should want to drive you forward, should want to have you in a proactive, creative state. So that connection then from consciousness, what we're thinking about, how we're feeling about it, what we're giving charge to, will then become will. So, you know, the power center for us is our solar plexus sort of area, which is where the heart center and the gut, you know, sort of I can do this aspect of self, where they meet is in that solar plexus area. So having conception of ideas about something should translate into that I want to get on with it, I want to do it, I want to experience it, I want to go that place, I want to meet that person, whatever, into will. If it's organic, then it is the point through which the organic will of source is able to express. But of course it then has to manifest into what, you know, the physical material reality around us. So it has to translate then into action, into a behaviour, into an actual activity of some kind. So your consciousness and essence meet where the will is in the middle three planes, and that is also what you would call your conscience, because your conscious awareness of what is real and true and right or wrong, and the essence of your beingness combined, that conscience is what, even though we can think about a whole lot of things, worry over a whole lot of things, want to do a whole lot of things, the combination of having those thoughts, those feelings, and then the reality of actually taking action on it, the conscience is the point at which we should, if we are aligned and receiving let's say balanced amount of source energy, then that would be the point at which it's a neutralizing, let's say, factor, a neutralizing aspect of, you know, if we acted as soon as we had a thought on everything, wouldn't necessarily be the best thing for us. So that would be an overview in terms of the soul plane, as I've put there: highest, truest self, projection of source. So the soul is created when source gives organic will and provides coding to create an aspect of self that is distinct, that is uniquely identified. That is then given, as we will see over here, a design of its own, and with each time the soul energy is utilised to create a construct or a character. We call them incarnations. The mental, etherical, emotional, causal, astral, physical, optimal planes, they're all, we're given access to them. So the source energy, organically speaking, that's flowing through them, through our unique identification code, we have access to them. So there's a record of what we've been tapping into with them, which is also at the supernal level connected into, for us, Mother Earth. If it was a extraterrestrial being, you know, that would be at the supernal level, different coding that they would have within their soul transmission. If it was an interdimensional being, that could possibly be another planet, or it could be a different realm altogether, which, you know, we'll talk about those distinctions in a session coming up. So once we've given charge focus to something, once the will is engaged and we decide to take action, the causal, before the action's actually taken, that decision is the causal. So when we, it's one thing, and we've all done it, and I have many times, to be like, I want to do this thing, but then there's always a reason why you don't get around to it. There's always some sort of, distraction or interference, or so you can feel that sense of will. I want to do it. You can keep saying you intend to do it. It's the point at which you decide you are doing it. It's actually going to happen. The causal plane will activate the coding to create a blueprint for that. So depending on what the thing is, that can happen all day, every day, on small, in small ways, on small scales, and it does. Sometimes it's bigger life decisions that it can take some time for the blueprints that we're manifesting, that we're creating, to sort of make their way into the physical material reality around us, because there might be a lot of moving parts. It can be that through the construct itself has to do some, sort of negotiating and moving some things around to make it happen. But that's essentially how they all come together. So the essence is the denser aspect of self. It's what gives us form. And so here we've got, this is not, some of these terms can be used interchangeably in different contexts, but just as an overview, just as an introduction, the essence typically would be the information, as in what's bringing things into form. The will, which is, the emotional, causal, astral planes, they give instruction, so it's the driving force aspect of it. It's what has us taking active sort of steps or motions. And then inspiration is more from consciousness, from our higher planes of existence, what we think about, if we want to invent. So on the input side, you can think of those aspects of self, if you're going to categorise the planes of existence into those three groupings. The aspects of self, our consciousness would be driving inspiration, instruction would be coming from the will, and information, what's bringing things into form for us, would be coming through essence. On the output side, how we experience them, we would be having, if it's inspiration, it would be our imagination, and it would be our intellect. So we'd be rationalising, we'd be reasoning, we'd be, thinking through different options. If we're getting inspiration about something, what's the best way to do it? Logic and reason. Instruction, that's where, for me at least, it makes sense when I think of my experience of that instruction. That's more the intuition, and so intuition for me is not just about sort of receiving data and having no point or purpose to it. Generally, if I'm getting intuition about something, it's because there's something I need to do with it. And then instinct, which we take more from the physical material reality around us, as in, our gut instinct. If we're picking up on vibes where something feels off, or it's more that sense of immediate either pleasure available or danger, or it's the construct itself, it's Mother Earth that is communicating with us as to what is going on in the here and now, in that present environment. So if we are aligned and receiving high densities of soul expression, then it would express out into densities of beingness that would reflect the descriptions that I've put here. So there is what is often referred to as null zone, as in the first two densities, is about the beingness, the presence. It's the inanimate, quote unquote, life forms. We don't typically think of them as living as such. I guess it depends who you're talking to. If you're talking to a biologist, they probably would. But it's your organic matter, minerals, metals, the oceans, anything that is present and purposeful, which everything, if it's source created, there's a point to it, there's a purpose for it, it's there for a reason. So all of those things in and of themselves are connected to the construct. They're a product of the construct, serving a purpose in a supportive sense for the life forms that we'll talk about in a minute in the densities above. So at the second density, we'd be talking about any organic matter material that has growth and movement. So we'd be talking about plants and animals and insects and so on. So at that level, again, still beings that are acting without agency, meaning their connection to the construct is what governs and guides their experience of the reality. So you're not finding birds that decide they're going to put on a fashion show, and you're not seeing plants decide, actually, I'm going to change my own colour. These processes, of course, not the fashion show, but a plant can, of course, change over time in terms of the coding of it. But in terms of thinking for self, it's not that they don't have these planes of existence. It's each density has dominant planes of existence that govern what is available, what is possible, what ultimately the range of potentials of that experience can be. So by design, the first and second densities are the aspects of this reality that are life forms but are not here to co-create, to change things in any kind of way. They're here to experience reality as it exists, if that makes sense. So where human beings come into this, at our very basic level, we should, if we were highly aligned with organic soul transmission, at least have self-awareness and exercise choice, which I think most people would say they are self-aware because they're aware of their person, they know they exist, and they make choices all the time to do whatever it is that they want to do. I would argue self-awareness is really more about awareness of truth and who and what we truly are. I am more spiritually guided and inclined there, so there is a debate you can have around what actually fully constitutes self-awareness versus self-ignorance, for instance, and whether people really are utilising choice or whether they're being subjected to norms and programming from the environment telling them who to be and how to be and what's right and what's real. And so personally, I feel like the vast majority of humans on this planet at this time are operating more from this density. I don't say that to be derogatory or to be unkind or judgmental. What I observe is most people, on the one hand, arguing that they do exactly what they want to do, and on the other hand, telling me all the reasons why they have to do this and they have to do that, and so there's some cognitive dissonance in terms of what appears to be real and true to people. And when we do the holographic session, we'll talk about agency more from the perspective of the objective reality versus the subjective reality, because that's where a lot of these programs do run. Whether what is supposed to happen is the organic programs are supposed to run most of what we experience. The only time really these are not source designed, just to be clear. The only time we're really supposed to experience a negative state or reaction is supposed to be to let us know this is not what you are, this is not what I am, this is not the I am, this is the I am not. But that mechanism within the design of the system is what has been exploited. It's what has been, let's say, amplified to the point where people now typically, in this world at least, at present will argue that negativity is the norm, but because it's become so normalised, they don't see it as negative, they just see it as realistic. It's what this world is, it's what this world does, it's how this world functions, and 'tis what it is, and you've just got to accept it. And I do realise, let me say this, because when I did the session yesterday, the sovereignty session, I do realise sometimes the way I personally express my beliefs can come across as if I think everything can just change overnight and it's easy and the solutions immediately available for everything. That's not what I believe. As we go through these sessions, and especially when we get to strategies and solutions, I do have a much more level-headed perception of how careful we have to be to ensure that we don't disrupt things to the point where people suffer as a result of not having access to resources, for instance, or not certain systems collapsing. We don't want that, but when we get into those sessions, what I will show is evidence that there are already solutions available that are just being suppressed or denied or ignored, or there are things that can already be integrated to the systems as they operate that will just help people access what is already rightfully theirs more efficiently with immediate effect. Now, again, myself, I'm not going to be the one person on the planet that's going to be able to convince pre-established fraudulent inverted systems to just give it up, just change. It's going to take many people calling for that, but doing so from a place of knowing the truth of who and what they are, and they have every right to request that, so that to me is where the self-awareness comes into it. So at our let's say lowest level of consciousness, organically speaking, that's at least where we should be. We should at least know what is fair and right and just and true, and then make choices from that. So this idea of having the organic and the inorganic, as I've already stated, when I did this session last year, I'd got really caught up in a lot of the information that Kim Gergen was putting out, and I truly believed that these operations were running and therefore this was all going away, all the negative side and stuff all going away. Which is funny now when I reflect on it, because for years prior, I've been on this path, I've been doing this research, and I'd always had, up to hearing testimony stating that this whole singing, all dancing AI system were uncoupling, you know, the energetic construct of this world from negative systems. And before any of that, I'd always had the perception that when we talk about ascension, or we talk about the shift, or talk about changes happening on the planet, to me it had always been about, on a collective level, enough light would be generated, we would be acting as conduits for enough light that it would shift us as a collective consciousness into a higher frequency range. And so that means none of this is really disappearing, we're just not going to be affected in the same way, in the sense of we're not, the viability for the interference that comes from these programs relies on a lower frequency range. There has to be less light, because when you bring light to darkness, you can see what's there, right? So the whole point is, when we talk about power versus force, power, presence, or projection of the organic will expressed in reality. Force is the false obfuscation of resources, casualising evil. And that's just reminded me, I didn't go through all these. So we've got causal here. It's not a spelling mistake that I've put casual there. So each of these is supposed to be antipodal, you know, like equal opposites. So casual, we think of it now typically when we use the word every day, it's like laid back. No, you know, not too formal, it's not too important. And as it states here, no meaning, no, you know, it's harmful in the sense that it casualises things that are harmful. So think of it more in terms of casualty. You know, if there's a casualty, you can pass it off, and maybe sometimes, you know, accidents happen, you can pass it off as, you know, there's no rhyme or reason to it, there's no one to point the finger at, there's no one to blame, it just is, it's just how life is. So that's where the causal is us invested, us participating in the process of creation. The casual is basically you don't have that power, you're not able to do that, there's no real meaning to anything, everything's random. And then the harms that can then be caused as a result of that. So let me just explain these as well, because I talked about consciousness, will and essence, I didn't talk about these. So deterioration, you know, it's pretty self-explanatory. When you're taking power from something, if it's a live system, it's going to suffer as a result of not having the optimal power source provided. So there's going to be, you know, whether it's decay, there's going to be an inferior version of it that is manifesting. That can happen over time, or it can happen pretty rapidly, dependent upon how much energy you've taken from it, because the energy is data in transit. All energy is light and or a derivative effect of light. So take that away, it's losing its source code and it's going to decay or deteriorate in some way. There you end up with an artificial version of it, and or within the construct, those of us with agency can create from what source has provided something that is antipodal, is the opposite, is the inversion of what source has gifted us, i.e. we can take metals and create weapons, for instance. Using them for tools is one thing, using them to murder each other is another, right? So that artificial imitation and unnatural, because even if you're using natural resources, if you're using it in unnatural ways, then that would be part of the deterioration that would happen over time to the populace, to the population, to whoever is affected by that within the construct. And the construct itself, planet Earth, is also going to be affected by, energetically speaking, by those choices and those behaviours. So wanton is, more traditionally, it's deliberate cruelty. I know some people use it more for like sexual promiscuousness, but to me, in its original form, wanton, it's about poorly disciplined or badly trained. It's casualising cruelty. It's just not caring, not caring about the impact that you have on others. It's merciless. So that, in terms of the will, the use of the will, organically, we're going to use it to give power to, which is what we're receiving, so we're going to be an expression of that. Wanton is more about what you can get, it's what you can take, it's what, do as thou wilt, I think, is the phrase that often comes in with the service to self or left-hand path or whatever. So, and then as consciousness, I've used what is Carl Jung's term, or more commonly derived from Jungian sort of theory, enantiodromia, meaning the emergence of the opposite over time. So it's not, just an immediate flip. Over time, we can get more and more distorted in our thoughts and how we feel about things, and what, our perception of reality can be heavily negatively influenced, and that happens as a result of depletion, and it happens as a result of suffering, and it happens as a result of stagnation, and these levels of the planes of our existence are what develop over time. The more we deny the truth of who and what we are and show up as the truth of who and what we are. So I always think, Lord of the Rings with the orcs and the elves. And the orcs are the elves that have been tortured and manipulated, and they become the orcs. So I think I always think of it in those terms, as in, the true essence of who and what we are, the true consciousness and will of who and what we are, is about adventure and excitement and doing the right thing and helping in some way and engaging with others or with the broader, the world around us in ways that are constructive and life supportive, and that to me is who and what we are. At our core, we are expressions of the supreme intelligence that has created many different types of beings to explore and express and experience things as representations of self. So that's the I am. The I am not is if you're not getting powered by source energy itself, you've got to find sustenance from somewhere, right? So you've got to take energy from other people, places, things in order to keep yourself going, and that's obviously what we've heard a whole lot about from different sources in terms of the beings that had heavily infiltrated and influenced what this past several thousand years of this planet's evolution has looked like, and we'll talk more about that in the changes, and have a look at what evidence there is for that, and so in terms of the energy flow, so the planes of our existence is the input. We are receiving, decoding, transmitting, and acting and sensing and being from that input. We're then experiencing the densities of reality reflective of how much light is present in our system at the time. So on an individual level, we can have good days, we can have bad days, we can have ups and downs within the day. We can fluctuate between, if you think of these as like the dominant programs expressing for each density. Let's say we are at that self-awareness and choice sort of level. Love, and I explained this in the session that I did last year. I'm mentioning this because this is one of the things that's been passed off as someone else's work. You know what I'm talking about. So, love is the sensation that we experience when we absorb more light, organic light. So the progression in terms of ascension for a being who is aware, they're connected to a higher source of intelligence and power, and is a representation of that, and is here to enjoy life and experience life in whatever guided, encouraged, our aspirations, our passions are all evidence or elements of what our organic soul source coding is guiding us towards. So the more we do that, the more light we're open and receptive to, and the more we're going to experience things that we enjoy. So from the environment around us, we're also going to have this feedback of, we feel great, we're doing great, everything feels great. So there's an amplification. The more light that we have in our system at any given time, the more love we're going to feel, which then strengthens our inner standing of the better we feel, the more sensitive we are to what doesn't feel good, what is in contrast to that. So the more we know ourselves as a result of having that high density of light present. Light, as we know, is data, so we have more information, so we're more aware. So it increases where we started with self-awareness and choice. Now we've got it to a higher degree. So that light, when you become embodied, or you are an embodiment of light, when you get to, and just to be clear, we're in a lower density collective. So us on an individual basis can have the best of days and the worst of days, and we can also be heavily affected by other people's energy around us. So and as I talked about earlier, that ripples out onto every level of influence that there is. So we can be feeling great, and then someone close to us can have some sort of tragedy or trauma, and that's going to affect how we feel. Someone can just be a bit of an arsehole to you that day, and you kind of been feeling great, and now you're like, what's that all about? So that's going to lower your state. What we see on the news is going to lower our state. Anything and everything that we consume in terms of data, and that is true whether it's what we're looking at, what we're listening to, what we're around in terms of resonance, because even just being in an environment, sometimes it can be a shift in vibe, so to speak. Even that, we can come away and be like, I feel drained, I don't even know why, I just went shopping or whatever. but also what we consume, literally consume, as in eat and drink. If we smoke, if we use any kind of substances, anything that finds its way into our system in any capacity is coding. So this is why, when it comes to, from the organic perspective, different plants and herbs and stuff, obviously there's many things provided for us in a life supportive way that can be healing and medicinal, but as we know, there's stuff that's also, it's powerful in the sense that it shifts our consciousness. So there's loads of research now about psychonauts, people that are being studied because of use of different substances and accessing different dimensions of being and interacting with different life forms, and that any way you introduce coding data into your system, and I'm not saying it's always a positive thing, obviously there's caution needs to be exercised in terms of how, if you're going to utilise those types of substances, like, you need to know what you're doing and you need to be with people who know how to support you with that. So I'm not suggesting we all just go and get mushrooms from somewhere, but you know what I'm saying. And obviously there's other stuff, ayahuasca, iboga. I can see the attraction, and it is something at some point I would quite enjoy experiencing, I believe. What I have wanted to do is ensure, as and when that happens, I feel fully corpus mentis, in the sense of, as I talked about in an earlier session, I've been dealing with a lot of negativity thrown at me, and some of that has been entities, and I would not rush into putting myself in a situation where I'd be shifting into a powerful altered state that could potentially open the doorway to any kind of negative influence or attack. So it's been rough enough, but as the point, the main point being, when people talk about, like, food is medicine, and so it's like, yeah, of course. And Jack Kruse, let me just mention him, because when it comes to this level of self, in terms of acting as conduits for either source or inorganic data transmissions, his content, his information is unbelievably insightful. I have listened to his work for the past few months. It was sort of Christmas time when I came across his content, and since then I've bought some of the books that he recommends, and some of the stuff in those books, it's funny, because in the sessions that I did last year, when I was talking about Bruce Lipton's work, for instance, in that I was talking about how every cell in our body is a microprocessor. It is the membrane of the cell is a brain of the cell, which acts as a liquid crystal semiconductor with gates and channels. And so Jack Kruse, in his content, in his work, and he does a lot of interviews and podcasts now, but he talks about that semiconduction as well, but his knowledge of how the organic light from the sun, how important that is for us, that's absorbing coding by us doing that. The organic, the connection to the construct. Our immediate world is planet Earth, but she sits within a construct which is the solar system, which sits within a construct which is the galaxy, and and so it goes. So him talking about light, water, magnetism, how to essentially reset our systems back to their organic coding like default, I guess, you know, the original blueprint. So powerful and useful, and I will, you know, in upcoming sessions I'll be calling on his work again to reference, but I would highly recommend, and I'll put for this session recommended resources together, and I will be putting him on there. So he talks about input and output, but he's talking at the quantum like biological sort of level. So he will talk about it in terms of electrons and then proton expression, which I will show. I'll show you how that fits with this when we do the holographic session, because it was a light bulb moment for me when he talked about that. His interviews he went on the Rick Rubin podcast with Andrew Huberman, and it's split into two parts. It's several hours altogether, but I've listened to it maybe 3-4 times now. In its entirety, I've also dipped back into different bits because it's really powerful, and the passion that he has for the subject is remarkable. So highly recommend that. So as we absorb more organic light, and there's many different ways that we can do that. Ingesting, being out in the sun, good idea. Because it's all data, because it's all information, not only are we feeling more empowered, but the wisdom in terms of our ability to process data on all of these different levels. And while I've just talked about the cellular sort of processing in the body, let's mention this as well. So we think of the brain as in the head brain, the headquarters, pun intended. By quarters, what am I talking about? So we think of the brain in the head being the highest densification of neurons, being the cells that are specifically designed to sort information into neural pathways that then act as programs or the programs that we're talking about here, as in the transmissions. Once we establish patterns, they become encoded into the neural structure of the brain. So we're receiving, it's not like all our intelligence is like contained within the head. We're antennae, we're constantly receiving information on all levels of self, and we'll talk about that with the holographic as well, with, you know, the sort of data compression and the how and why protons, why Jack Kruse would talk about them being the output. It makes absolute sense when you understand the holographic principle. It is, I did talk about it in one of the sessions that I did last year, so if you're watching this and you just want me to get to that point, I have already explained in another session, but I want to restate it because it is significant. But so we're receiving information all the time, but what can and does shape what becomes our personal reality, which is personality, unless we're hiding, you know, unless we're being inauthentic. Organically speaking, our personal reality should reflect our authentic soul expression. So we should, you know, wear heart on sleeve, show up and be who we're meant to be, who we're here to be, who we're guided to be, what brings the love and you know, a greater sense of inner standing. organically speaking, that's what it would be. Obviously, there's a whole lot of people that wear masks and pretend to be things that they're not and manipulate people, but looking at it from the organic perspective, so that's at that level. And obviously we do think of the brain being most, the brain in the head being most responsible for how we think about things, which then how we feel about things, and so on. There's a lot of people now that will understand that that's not the only area of the vessel that we have that has a concentration. It has the largest concentration of neurons, but we, number one, if we're going to talk about it in quarters, as in headquarters, the brain stem obviously goes down the central nervous system, which is encased in this spinal column. So you've got neurons all the way down your spine as well, so you've got your brain body interaction, which will then have nerve sort of networks that are spread out for the peripheral sort of thing. So it's how we, if I think about moving my hand, I can move my hand. If I think about picking that cup up, I can pick that cup up. So there's that interaction. We also have a concentrated cluster of neurons in the heart, which is in quantity much smaller than the brain, but in quality, in terms of it's a powerhouse. It's in the energetic toroidal sort of field around us. It's the aspect of our being that has the strongest transmission, the strongest sort of magnetic resonance, and reaches furthest. And we can, what's been shown in research is we can, the more light we absorb and the more energy we are processing and therefore transmitting, our energetic fields do expand. So when we say things like he filled the room, she filled the space, she filled the stage, I felt him coming before I even walked through the door, sort of thing. There's that energetic permeation or propulsion that's happening. Conversely, when we're in lower states of being, there's that energetic reversal that happens where we sort of pull in energy from the environment. So that's when we can be very draining to be around, or we can find other people draining to be around if it's them in that state. And the language side of it were one of the first things that really fascinated me. I was at the time studying a master's in linguistics, and the more I learn about human energetics from a quantum biological, quantum physical perspective, and the more I realise that we are biophotonic beings, the more it blew my mind how much we use the universal metaphors of light and dark and up and down in terms of in relation to mood and intelligence. I had a light bulb moment, or she saw the light, or she was radiant, he was beaming. We use all of this sort of terminology. I was down in the dumps, I was on top of the world. There's so it's kind of, I'm years on from that now, but at the time I was just like, oh my god, it's on a subtle subconscious level, we know this stuff, or on a super conscious level we know this stuff. We just think of it as metaphor, but it's not. And I raised that point with one of my tutors at the time, who was quite dismissive of the significance of it, I thought, because to me it's we're teaching stuff as metaphors, and they're actually not. They're literal interpretations of what's happening. So I think that's pretty significant. But anyway, interdisciplinary approaches to these types of topics are not. I think it's changing now, but you know, we're going back 14, 15 years. So you know, it seemed quite like we're linguists. You know, this is language. We're not looking at biophotons. Anyway, where was I? So yes, so the heart has its own smaller brain, you could say, and then obviously many people now know in the gut there is also concentrations of neurons, which many people are now up to speed with, you know, the link between mental health and gut health and what is supposed to be happening. So there's in quarters, brain in the head, spinal, you know, the nerves, the neurons that are in sort of the spine, then the heart, brain, and the gut brain, which does tie with these, you know, where our instincts come from, what our intuition is about things, and what we imagine, ideas, how we reason, how we problem solve, how we make decisions, all of that stuff. Typically we think about, if they're all working in conjunction, then we should have wisdom. That's, you know, if we're exposing ourselves to high quantities of organic source coding through light, and we're aligned, utilising each of those aspects of self, then we would have wisdom. Now, again, I talked about the love thing. I did talk about the wisdom verses at the time in the previous version of this that I did as a descriptor, as the sort of antipodal, equal opposite to wisdom. I had intellect down here. Where am I looking here? I've now changed it to degenerative ignorance, because the intellect itself is not the problem. And I felt this at the time, and I said in that session, I wasn't sure what term to use, because all types of intelligence, any mechanism through which we can process data is typically helpful, useful for us. And where my thoughts kept going at the time was to, when the intellect is used in isolation, and we're not using, you know, social intelligence, emotional intelligence, creativity, what we then get is what we typically refer to as psychopathy. You know, people who they are distanced, let's say, from their capacity to care. So you know, that's what we were talking about with the casualizing evil and evilness. Seeing as in the previous session I talked about goodness being God's original organic design, navigation, empowerment, support system, through which, you know, light is the combination of the projection of the organic will combined with the coding, with the language that God Source Creator created to inform and bring all of this into being. So if that's goodness, evilness to me is everything that violates and interferes with life, with this process, that is negating the effects of the support system. So I'm not going to write it up, because I think there's enough information for you to have to sort of attend to right now, but on another session I probably will. But just to restate that, evilness, everything that violates and interferes with life, negating the effects of the support system that is provided to us through the goodness system, the overarching operating system of this reality. Okay, so when we embody light, when we've absorbed so much of it that we are acting and experiencing reality from a place of genuine organic wisdom, then that creates the conditions through which multi-unity, as in any and all life forms, achieve balance. So when I talked about from the organic systems perspective and from Source's perspective, our experience here is not supposed to just be about how we feel and what we think. That is important, but in conjunction with what's fair and right for everyone. So it's not about me just getting mine and other people going without. It's about ensuring that any and all beings have access to what they need. And I always think about this in terms of Maslow's hierarchy. You know, if you can meet the needs at the sort of fundamental levels, so safety needs, our, you know, we need food, we need shelter, we need tools to do whatever it is we've come to do, we need access to, if it's education, we need access to education. Right now, of course, that's also included in the control systems, but I come from a background in education and I love learning, and I will be a lifelong learner. So to me, I still think there is a lot of value as things stand. I just think we can certainly improve access in terms of what is right now. One of the biggest barriers being cost, of course. Things have changed, obviously, with what's available online, and you know, these things change. I also am not a fan of the like high ticket price online stuff. I think it's, to me, feels greedy, but you know, I'm not here to judge anybody, but I think just making as much as you can from people, it's good to ensure that you take care of your basic needs, of course, but it feels a bit exploitative to me. But again, I'm not here to put anybody down. So multi-unity and balance, once you get to that point, once you've learned all there is to learn about utilising what this system has to offer, then there is the transition, let's say, and I'm not suggesting that we learn all there is to learn in a singular lifetime. We can access any and all of these densities. How often we do, how powerfully we tap into them, and how long we sustain them for will decide the density that we most often experience is our destiny. And this is known by those forces, by those influences that would like to maintain the conditions on this planet habitable for themselves. They know that the more often we tap into these high-powered positive states, and we'll look at Richard Dawkins, no, not Richard Dawkins, I knew I'd say that wrong, not Richard Dawkins, we'll look at David Hawkins' Power versus Force. I initially came across his work not long after I'd had my out-of-body experience. I bought a bunch of his books in 2012. His Transcending Levels of Consciousness, just I loved, and the Power versus Force. You know, I've drawn up just to show, in fact, how similar what he tapped into using kinesiology the responses he was able to get, the descriptors that he used, they correlate so strongly in terms of our emotional processing and how that translates into attitudes and behaviours. It's such a, you know, close match to what we're talking about here. This, by the way, I'd never seen anyone talk about lower densities in terms of offering any kind of description, but the upper densities I did years ago. I saw a YouTube video that Bentino Mazzaro had done. Now, I've not followed much of his content, but I did manage to find it, so I'll put that on the recommended resources, because I remember him making some interesting points about interactions between the densities, particularly from the point of view of, so for those of us with agency and therefore capability to have a dominant program of self-awareness and choice running, I remember him talking about how when we interact with animals, for instance, and we're reinforcing their presence in terms of almost teaching them about, you know, you're a good boy, aren't you? Kind of, it's like that reinforcement of them becoming self-aware. It's like teaching self-awareness, and I just remember at the time finding that really fascinating. I can't remember loads else, but some of his descriptions for the higher densities that he gives in that talk I found really interesting. So he does in that as well talk about free will being the choice between I am, you know, it doesn't use the exact terms, but it's like free will is an unavoidable aspect of being a being with agency. If God Source Creator had designed us to be remote controlled, then there would have been no surprise, no growth, no learning. There'd be no generative point to the system. It would have just been a big game, you know. And some people talk about it as a playground. Some people talk about being within the simulation as a battle zone. Some people talk about it as a big university, it's a big school. You know, it depends what type of experience we're having, of course. But he talks about it, which I think is correct, in the sense of, in order to allow aspect of self to explore and experience organically, there has to be the capability for that being, that character, that avatar, to make free will choices. And as a result of that, there is, of course, the risk that carries of those choices being I am not, I am not, I am not, I am not, which gives rise to, over time, evil, which, you know, there are, of course, lesser and greater evils. I'm not suggesting everything that would come under the category of violating and interfering with life. Not saying it's all like repulsive, disgusting, you know. Of course we've all engaged in thoughts, feelings, actions that, even if it's just harm in the sense of, you know, what we're putting in as bodies, for instance. I don't mind a glass of wine. Is that evil? I don't think so. Is it harmful? Yeah, kinda. Too much of it, of course. And that's the antipodal thing as well with those systems. The organic system would be helpful, supportive, constructive, you know, the stuff that I'd written on the last section that I did at the bottom of the creator in terms of the system as descriptors for what the system is. And of course there's also equal opposite in those senses as well. So if the organic system is helpful, the inorganic system's harmful. If the organic system is constructive, the inorganic system is destructive. It's the equal opposite, which is a unavoidable function of the system in order to allow agency, choice to be made. But the more we get lost in or stuck in those lower densities first, because it comes from experience first. So the input of organic source coding, the expression of that, if we decide we're unhappy with what we're being guided to do, or what we've received, or what the outcome is, these are the ways where those distortions first start to happen, and over time. So obviously we'll talk about it in a different session, but I'm getting the Lucifer's fall. So I'm getting that coming to mind in terms of, we'll look at explanations for how historically key events have led to us being in this place at this time, experiencing what we're experiencing, and we'll lay it out, in a more logical fashion. But the key point to that segment really for me is, in any given moment we have the choice between the two. We do have free will, but the more often, the more powerfully and the longer we sustain either the positive organic or the negative, positive being give power to, negative being take power from. The more often we do that, the more powerfully. So for instance, you can be a good person, many of us, most of us are, but you can make one really bad mistake at some point, and that can shift things in life forever for you. So when I say more powerfully, the more often we feel a certain way, the more powerfully we feel that way, and or engage in said activity. Or if we take a giant leap from making all the good decisions to suddenly just doing something that was really not good for us, for other people, for the world, that can really change things, and how long we can sustain certain states as well. So if we're nice people, good people, giving people, loving people, creative people, passionate people, charismatic people, if we're that most of the time, and then we're having a crappy day, okay. In fact, in one of the previous sessions that I did from the content that I did last year, I talked about Barbara Fredrickson's work in terms of the ratios of what creates an incentive cycle for us. So it's 3 to 1. If we're going around in circles, if nothing's really changed in life, typically, it's like half and half. We're doing what we're doing good is cancelled out by what we're doing that's harmful for us or harmful for others, if it's like a more karmic thing. And then if we're in a downward spiral, we would have it the other way around, 3 to 1 ratio of mostly making disempowering choices, or experiencing reality in disempowering sort of ways, not showing up as true authentic self, essentially. And there can be any number of reasons why the circumstances and conditions around us can be creating that. Obviously I'm not just saying it's all our own fault, but it's interesting from the research, from the literature point of view, it's interesting to look at what was found in terms of some of the more helpful tools and techniques that you can use to kind of snap yourself out of if you're in a bit of a spiral and you're feeling deflated or defeated or depressed or, you know, angry and all of that sort of stuff. Coping mechanisms. I'll link the recommended resources. I think they may actually be on the recommended resources from last year. I linked them in the first 2 videos of this series, so I think Barbara Fredrickson's content is already included on the recommended resources, but I will check. Also, if we're talking about positive psychology, Sean Aker, his The Happiness Advantage, the TED Talk that he did, and I got his book after that. His TED Talks were really funny, and it's powerful. What he's saying is true, so the truth is always powerful because truth is source coding. So I would recommend that as well. I'll make sure that's on the playlist. Let me think, is there anything else? Oh yeah, so let me just finish the point that I introduced. So once we've mastered, let's say, within any specific incarnation, any and all of, so from a soul perspective, we have aspects of soul that are living experiences of reality in different worlds and realms that are collectively based in different densities and within different dimensions, which I'll talk about in the next session. So there is a qualification, let's say, when our soul has come into a physical material reality in different worlds and realms over and over and over again, and it's like literally mastering multi-unity and balance every single time it's figured out how to work with the system, the organic operating system. It knows how to do that. Then there will be a transition, a transcendence into becoming more integrated into part of the building, the construction, the planning, the design of the various constructs and characters. So the densities 7, 8 and 9 are the ones that are helping to guide. So when we talk about higher guidance and higher self, and the beings, the souls that have their unique identifiers, they're not taking on a physical form, but they are operating at densities of being where they are providing through the system guidance, instruction. So you have organic source coding that's coming through your soul transmission all the time, multi-directionally. You know, we'll talk about that in the next session, but essentially it's the infinity flow. I think I've already mentioned this on a previous session, but if you imagine that 360, so it does that but goes round in a circle, so toroidally. So we've got that information coming to us all the time, and we're receiving, decoding, responding to that. But what we also have within the organic operating system, which is the reason why it can feel like not everything in terms of guidance feels like that was a direct communication with God, source, creator. I know for me, after that outer body experience, it was several years later before I started to feel that I was having genuine, clear guidance in, and it's not, you know, it's not like all day, every day. I'm not that tapped in to that degree. However, our soul essence, our soul expression is God source energy. So you are always been guided by that, but it's different to, like in the outer body experience that I had in the secondary awakening video that I did last year. I described that, and I talked about, in that experience there was a moment where it almost felt like Source was sort of speaking into my crown, kind of like crown chakra sort of thing. It was like, it wasn't loud, but it was so powerful. It like resonated through me. So that level of connection to Source, obviously that was a different, that was an altered state of consciousness, so it's not like I receive that all day every day. There has been times within my vessel that I've been, you know, trying to figure something out, or I've been just contemplating things, and I've felt very clear, direct instruction or guidance or reassurance often. But there is also this feeling that I've had for many years, and this started, well, this actually goes back to childhood, but it ramped up after that outer body experience. Guidance that feels like it's from, like it's cosmic, you know, it kind of feels like it's from different places. I've never gone down the route of channeling, as in wanting to know, like, who am I talking to and what are you telling me? I can feel the elevated, I can feel the light that is transmitting. I can feel the love, and therefore I know it's of a positive nature. It's always connected to goodness. It's never trying to talk me into doing anything harmful to me or anybody else, or it's never giving me insights into things that could be you know, potentially sort of contentious, at least with anyone who has the genuine desire to see positive change on the planet that benefits the many and not just the few. You know, so when I say it's never been contentious, I mean from an organic perspective. It shouldn't be a problem. It doesn't mean I don't get adverse reactions from people about that information, but I tell you what happens a lot. Dependent on what it is that's going on, higher guidance, which to me, so higher self, at our highest levels of consciousness, our soul is an aspect of Source. So in its truest sense, higher self is Source expression communicating with us. But we can be at lower levels of consciousness in terms of the frequency range of possibilities and potentials that we're accessing. So we filter it from that lower frequency range. So it's not going to feel profound, you know, Source is giving you like higher level truth. So it's going to feel like in resonance with, an energetic match to whatever it is that you're resonating with at the time. But if our higher self is ultimately Source, then when I talk about higher guidance, it's like there's a distinction there. So to me that is not simply higher aspects of my soul, but also soul tribe, soul family, soul group, if you like. So I have a unique identifier, every other soul does, but some of those are going to be grouped, let's say. So that's my perception, and what they do often is sing to me, which is you know, can be funny, can be comforting. I like to write songs, so if I'm really sort of frazzled, they'll sing songs to me, but some of them are original sort of pieces, so I try to capture them. So yeah, that, you know, to me is beings who are operating on the higher densities, as in that's their primary place of function. That's you know, whatever construct that is that they're connected into, whatever world, whatever realm, that's where they're communicating from. So again, the lower densities are antipodal, so what is up to us is down to a consciousness, a being who is expressing and experiencing reality from the I am not, you know, the anti-source perspective. They're going to experience everything in opposition to how an organic being does, and this is what many of us get drawn into. And this is, you know, for some people it's so normalised now that they don't understand that, like, if you're talking about, for instance, a lot of the things that we're fearful about, it's been the false obfuscation of our resources that has, you know, is in force, that has caused the perpetuation and the prevalence of fear on this planet. It's you know, people will argue that the reality functions as it does because there isn't enough to go around, but when you really look at nature, there's evidence of the potential for abundance in all things, and by design. You know, we live in such a wasteful world, but yet we argue that there's not enough to go around. And just as an example, like, you know, that fear that people have, that if you step into your organic source given authority and power, that it's somehow going to lead to greater harm, is what, from my perspective, is what prevents a lot of people from wanting to even hear, you know, what could be real and possible. So I feel like this session has got quite long. Anything that I've talked about from the organic perspective, when it comes to further discussion and more proofs of how at this moment in time, I believe, as a collective species, we are experiencing this reality more from these programs, will come through as we talk about, you know, the changes that are happening, the strategies and solutions that can help with them, and the challenges and obstacles that we need to get over. As we talk about them, these are what we're going to be talking a lot more about, because they're what are most dominantly present. So I'm not going to go into a long explanation or description right now. I feel like I've talked at you for long enough, so thank you to anybody who comes to listen to this. In the next session, we're going to do that holographic session. I'll put a playlist of recommended resources together to bring what we've talked about in this session together, to give, you know, further signposting if people want to go and look at anything more that's connected to it. And I will see you soon, or speak to you soon.